The whole town told her to run, to forget that place ever existed, but she had nowhere left to go. A poor single mom and her 3 young children inherited a freezing, abandoned cabin on the edge of Grand Rapids, Minnesota. She hoped it would be a roof, nothing more. But on their first night, as the wind howled through the broken windows, her oldest son felt the floorboards tremble. Beneath the rotting wood, they discovered a hidden hatch, one no one in the town ever spoke about. What waited below wasn't just an old cellar. It was a forgotten chamber sealed since the 1980s, filled with documents, recordings, and a secret powerful enough to expose decades of lies from one of Minnesota's most influential companies. A truth so heavy it threatened to shatter the peace of an entire community. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel and whose hearts they reach. A sharp winter wind swept across Duluth, carrying with it the heavy breath of Lake Superior as snow drifted down in slow, relentless sheets. Laura Bennett pulled her torn coat tighter around her body, trying to shield her 3 children from the cold that crept into their bones like an unwanted truth. Laura, a 32-year-old single mother with soft brown hair often tied into a loose, tired bun, and pale skin touched by exhaustion, keen rather than rest, had eyes the color of worn denim, faded, brave, and unbearably gentle. She had the frame of someone who had spent far too many years carrying weight she was never meant to hold, thin shoulders sloping slightly, as if memories themselves had mass. Her breath trembled against the midnight air as she pressed her children closer. Beneath the roof of the abandoned bus shelter, a structure so old that the metal seemed to sigh with each gust of wind. Noah, her oldest at 10, had Laura's eyes but not her softness. He was wiry, sharp, and observant, with messy dark hair that reminded Laura of the wild grass near the lake in late autumn. Life had made him older than his years. Worry sat on his small face like a permanent shadow. Grace, 7 years old, was the opposite, tiny, with golden brown hair undone by the wind cheeks flushed pink from the cold, and a demeanor that swayed between fear and wonder. She had inherited Laura's empathy, but in a body too small to understand the world's cruelty. Eli, the youngest at 4, clung to Laura's leg, his small fingers stiff from the cold. He had curls like soft chestnut wool, and eyes too big for his little face, full of innocence and uncertainty. His silence was the silence of a child who didn't yet have the words to describe hunger. The night deepened around them, the swirling snow dimly illuminated by the flickering yellow street lamp above. Duluth in winter was an unforgiving place, streets slick with ice, buildings crusted with frost, and a horizon that looked swallowed by a long, endless storm. The city itself felt like it was holding its breath. "Mom," Noah whispered, rubbing his hands together inside his thin sweatshirt. "Are we staying here tonight?" Laura didn't answer at first. She wanted to tell him no. She wanted to promise warmth, a bed soup simmering on a stove. But lies taste bitter in a cold mouth. Just for a little while, she finally murmured, placing her hand on his back. "We just need to rest." Noah nodded. Though his jaw clenched, he didn't believe her, but he wanted to. Grace leaned into Laura's side, her small voice quivering. "It hurts to breathe." Laura pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead. "I know, baby. I know." The cold didn't feel like weather anymore. It felt like a verdict. They had walked across 2 neighborhoods earlier that day, after Laura was told with a corporate smile that she was no longer needed at the deli she had worked at for 3 years. Her manager, Mr. Calhoun, a round man with graying hair and a voice as soft as damp cardboard, had looked uncomfortable when he told her. He avoided her eyes the whole time, tapping his pen on the counter as he explained it was budget cuts and nothing personal. But Laura knew his type harmless until he had to choose between kindness and convenience. He'd chosen convenience. "You can take the leftover bread," he had offered weakly, "if you want." The humiliation of the moment sat heavy in Laura's chest now. She wished she had refused the bread, but she had taken it. Hunger makes dignity a luxury. She breathed slowly, trying not to think about tomorrow. Duluth was a city that belonged to winter. Jobs were scarce, shelters were full, and even hope felt like something that needed firewood to survive. Yet she had 3 children who depended on her smile more than her truth. She forced a calmness she didn't feel and looked at them brushing snow from their hair. "We'll figure it out," she whispered more to herself than to them. A bus rumbled past, snow spraying up behind the wheels, but it didn't stop. They weren't waiting for a bus anyway, they were waiting for time to be less cruel. Eli tugged at Laura's sleeve. "Mama, my toes feel funny." Alarm flickered across her heart. Frostbite was not a fear she could afford. She quickly lifted him onto her lap, pressing his boots between her hands, trying to warm them with her breath. "It's okay, sweetheart," she murmured. "Mommy's got you." But inside she was screaming at a world that would let children freeze. She closed her eyes, leaning her head against the icy metal wall behind her. Exhaustion sat on her like another layer of winter. The only sounds were the wind, the traffic far away, and her children's small breaths. Then, footsteps. A man approached, bundled in a brown coat dusted with snowflakes. He had a scruffy beard peppered with gray and tired blue eyes that carried a lifetime of regrets. His name was Tim, though Laura didn't know that yet. He was a worker at the nearby shipping yard, and like many men who worked long shifts, he often walked home late. Laura stiffened instinctively. Men at night made her wary. He paused when he noticed them huddled together. His voice was low and gruff, shaped by years of smoking and swallowing disappointment. "You folks all right?" Laura nodded quickly, even though every part of her screamed no. "We're fine. Just waiting for the storm to pass." Tim studied her. He wasn't the type who liked getting involved. Life had taught him that helping people often hurt more than walking away. But something in the way Laura held her children, shielding them with a body that had already been through too much, made something old and soft stir inside him. "You need a place to warm up?" he asked, rubbing the back of his neck. "There's a diner 2 blocks down. They stay open late." Laura hesitated. Accepting help felt like exposing weakness. But Noah looked at her and Grace shivered violently. She exhaled. "Thank you," she said softly. "We'll go." Tim nodded and walked on, leaving footprints in the fresh snow. They followed the direction he'd pointed, trudging through the biting wind. The diner glowed like a promise ahead, yellow light spilling onto the street, the smell of coffee drifting through cracks in the door. For a brief moment, Laura let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow wouldn't be as cruel as today. But she didn't know yet that a letter, an unexpected inheritance, would soon arrive and pull her out of this frozen night into a story she never imagined. She didn't know the winter itself was guiding her toward a secret buried in the snow. And she didn't know how deeply her life was about to change. Snow hammered the windows of the small, brightly lit diner like 1,000 impatient fingers demanding entry, as if the storm itself wanted to follow Laura and her children inside. The warmth of the place wrapped around them slowly like an embrace they weren't sure they were allowed to accept. Laura guided her kids into a booth by the window, their coats dripping onto the floor in small puddles that sparkled under the neon lights. The diner was nearly empty at this late hour. A waitress with tired shoulders and a braided gray ponytail wiped down the counter. She was a woman in her late 50s named Marlene, with small, alert hazel eyes and deep smile lines that suggested a lifetime of listening to other people's troubles. Her floral apron had faded corners, and she moved with the quiet rhythm of someone who had spent decades making sure others were fed, even when she was exhausted herself. Marlene glanced at the family and offered a warm nod, sensing their cold and hunger instantly. Without asking, she walked over and placed 4 steaming mugs of hot water on the table. "It's not much," she said in a gentle voice roughened by years of brewing coffee, "but it'll help your fingers thaw." Laura whispered a thank you, her voice barely steady. Noah wrapped his hands around a mug as if he feared someone might take it away, while Grace leaned forward, watching the steam rise like a ghost she couldn't name. Eli rested his head on Laura's arm, already drifting toward sleep, the kind of sleep that comes not from comfort, but from sheer exhaustion. The bell above the diner door jingled suddenly as a gust of wind hurled snow inside. A man in a thick navy jacket stepped in, stomping ice from his boots. He carried a stack of envelopes tucked under one arm. His name was Jack Halverson, a 35-year-old outreach volunteer from the Duluth Community Center. Jack had a rugged, northern look. Broad shoulders, sandy blonde hair cropped short, and a beard that made him seem older than he actually was. His eyes, a sharp glacier blue, held the kind of steady kindness that belonged to people who did more listening than talking. Life had hardened him early. His younger brother had died in a winter accident when Jack was still a teenager, a loss that had carved both caution and compassion into his character. Jack scanned the diner until his eyes landed on Laura and the 3 children. Recognition softened his expression. He walked toward their booth with careful steps, as if approaching a fragile memory. "You're Laura Bennett, right?" he asked gently. Laura stiffened, instinctively protective. "Yes." Why, Jack lowered the pile of envelopes and searched through them. "I stopped by the shelter earlier. They said you'd come this way. Someone left something for you." He pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed tightly, the paper slightly crinkled from travel. Laura frowned, confused. "Left something?" "For me?" Jack nodded. "Certified mail. Whoever sent it made sure it reached you tonight." He placed the envelope on the table with a respectful distance, as though it contained something breakable. Laura stared at it. She wasn't expecting anything. She didn't receive mail, not even bills, since she had no address. With hands trembling from uncertainty rather than cold, she broke the seal. Inside was a neatly folded letter from the county registry office of Itasca County, a place nearly 100 miles northwest of Duluth. The header alone made her pulse quicken. She unfolded the document. Her eyes scanned the precise print words she wasn't sure she understood at first. Transfer of ownership. Parcel number 48GR214. Property located in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, to Laura Bennett, next of kin. She blinked, stunned. A breath hitched in her chest. "What is it?" Mom Noah asked quietly, leaning closer. Laura swallowed hard. "It says, we inherited something." Marlene, who had drifted back to the counter but kept one eye on them, paused mid-wipe. Jack's brow furrowed. "Inherited. From who I don't know?" Laura whispered. Her voice felt small, swallowed by the sudden weight of the moment. There was no family, no one left who knew her name, let alone cared enough to leave her property. The letter gave no explanation, only the phrase "next of kin," written in firm, impersonal ink, followed by a signature she didn't recognize. Grace tugged Laura's sleeve. "Mommy, does that mean we have a house?" Laura couldn't answer. Fear and hope tangled inside her like 2 animals locked in battle. What if it was a mistake? What if it was a trap? What if it was a miracle? Jack studied her face with gentle caution. "You want me to look at it?" She hesitated, then handed him the letter. Jack read it slowly, lips pressed into a thin line of concern. "It's real," he said, finally. "I've seen documents like this before. It looks like an old property, maybe land, maybe a cabin." He tapped the bottom of the page. "But Grand Rapids is a small town. This sort of thing doesn't happen randomly." Laura's stomach twisted. Nothing in her life had ever arrived randomly except hardship. Why would a property, any property, be tied to her name? She tried to piece together her childhood memories. Foster homes, group homes, a string of strangers' living rooms. She had no blood relatives, no family records, no roots. So why this? Marlene approached quietly, holding a small plate of buttered toast. She placed it in front of the children with the soft authority of a grandmother. "On the house," she said, "kids shouldn't go hungry in weather like this." Laura's eyes stung. She couldn't remember the last time a stranger offered her something without expecting anything in return. The storm outside worsened, winds howling like ancient voices struggling to be heard. Noah studied the map coordinates printed on the last page. "Mom, we should go." Laura looked at him, startled by the certainty in his voice. Noah rarely asked for anything. Hunger had made him quiet and disciplined, an adult trapped in a boy's small frame. "Why do you think we should go?" she whispered. "Because he said simply, anything is better than here." Grace nodded vigorously. Even Eli, half asleep, mumbled, "Go." Laura folded the letter slowly, as if folding the fragile possibility of their future. Under the fluorescent lights, her face softened, not with joy, but with a flicker of something dangerously close to hope. Jack pulled a pen from his coat pocket. "If you want," he said, "I can help arrange transportation tomorrow. A bus won't make it through the countryside in this storm, but I might know someone with a truck." Laura met his gaze. He had the sincere look of a man who wasn't trying to be a hero, just someone who refused to look away when others struggled. She nodded slightly. "Thank you." When Jack left the diner, felt quieter, filled with only the soft sound of her children eating toast slowly, reverently, as though it's the last warm food they might ever see. Laura looked once more at the envelope. Snow pressed hard against the windows, but for the first time that night she felt the world shift just a little. Enough to make room for possibility. Enough to remind her that not every ending is permanent. Some are disguised beginnings waiting to thaw. Snow thickened into a pale curtain as the morning bus rumbled out of Duluth, its engine groaning like an old animal forced to move through a world that had grown colder than it remembered. Laura Bennett sat near the back, her 3 children gathered close around her like fragile birds seeking shelter beneath a single wing. The heater worked only in bursts, weak, uneven breaths that smeared the frost on the windows rather than clearing it. Outside, the world blurred into a sweeping whiteness. Tall pines swayed heavily under fresh snow, bending like ancient guardians bowing to the storm. Every few miles, a solitary mailbox or crooked fence emerged from the haze only to vanish again, swallowed by trees and wind, as if the forest itself was erasing human presence. The bus driver, a broad-shouldered man named Ralph Trenton, kept his eyes fixed on the icy road. Ralph was in his mid-60s with a scruffy silver beard covering a square jaw, deep-set brown eyes, and skin cracked from decades of harsh winters. He had the quiet temperament of someone who preferred machines to people machines at least didn't lie or break promises. A faded tattoo of an anchor peeked out from under his sleeve, hinting at a life lived long before Minnesota. He drove with the solemn focus of someone who understood the price of carelessness. Rumors said he'd once lost a friend to black ice on this very route. Laura watched him cautiously through the mirror, grateful for his steady hands. Her own shook slightly in her lap. Ever since she'd boarded with the children and the single duffel bag containing their entire lives, a knot of fear had lodged in her throat. She wasn't sure if she was running towards something or away from everything. Noah, sitting by the window, pressed his palm against the cold glass. His breath fogged a small circle where he had been staring out, watching lonely cabins flicker by like fireflies, fading in and out of existence. He imagined each one held warmth, soft, yellow lights, blankets people who had no idea what it felt like to ration hope. Grace slept with her head on Laura's arm, strands of her golden brown hair clinging to her cheeks. She had cried earlier when they walked through the snow to the bus station, frightened by the cold and unsure of where they were going. Now exhaustion wrapped her in a fragile peace. Eli lay curled sideways across Laura's lap, his little boots dangling over the edge of the seat. His tiny chest rose and fell with the steady rhythm of deep sleep. Laura brushed his curls back tenderly. Despite everything, the hunger, the cold, the fear, he slept as if he trusted the world. Something inside her ached painfully at the thought. The bus hit a patch of rough ice, jostling them softly. Laura bit her lip, tasting the metallic tang of blood. She had made choices before, choices forced upon her by circumstance and necessity, but this journey felt different. It felt like fate pulling her forward by the collar, whispering that she had no right to stop and no reason to turn back. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the letter, the inheritance document. The words next of kin stared at her like a riddle she wasn't equipped to solve. Mom Noah asked quietly, noticing her grip the paper, "Are you scared?" She hesitated, then met his serious gaze. Noah had always seen more than she wanted him to. A little, she admitted. But sometimes fear just means you're walking into something new, something that might matter. "But what if it's a mistake?" Noah whispered. "What if they didn't mean to send it to you?" Laura folded the letter carefully. "We'll find out together." The bus slowed as it reached the edge of the forest highway. Snow draped over the asphalt like a burial cloth. Here the mountains loomed closer, gentler than the Rockies, but steep and dark, rising like old giants beside the road. Ralph muttered something under his breath and flicked on the high beams. A flash of white crossed the light, a deer bounding into the trees. "Damn near ran into us." Ralph grunted to himself, gripping the wheel tighter. Laura exhaled shakily. Even nature seemed restless today. As the bus pushed deeper into the wilderness, the air inside grew quieter. A young woman in a parka 2 rows ahead scrolled through her phone with pink fingertips. An elderly man wearing a green flannel jacket snored softly near the front. A pair of teenage boys whispered about ice fishing trips planned for spring. None of them paid attention to Laura's little family. They existed in their own fragile bubble, one held together by motherly instinct and a letter written by a stranger. After nearly 2 hours, Ralph's voice crackled through the old speaker above them. "Next stop, Grand Rapids. If this is your destination, make sure you have your things. Roads get rough farther north." Laura's stomach clenched. This was real now. She gathered their belongings, 2 coats, the duffel bag, and a thin blanket Marlene had pressed into her hands at the diner. When the bus rolled to a stop near a small station half buried in snow, the door hissed open with a gust of freezing wind. Ralph turned in his seat, eyeing them with a stern but gentle expression. "Be careful out there," he said. "Storm's coming back tonight." He didn't smile much, but the sincerity in his eyes was warmer than anything the heater could offer. Laura nodded gratefully. She lifted Eli into her arms, held Grace's hand, and watched Noah sling the duffel bag across his shoulder as if he were older, stronger than he had any right to be. The platform was nearly empty. A lone truck rolled by in the distance, headlights blinking through the flurry. Above them, the sky held a heavy gray belly swollen with more snow waiting to fall. A small wooden bench stood near the station wall. A laminated map fluttered violently against its metal frame. The world felt unbearably big in that moment, and Laura felt unbearably small. Then, out of the white haze, a figure approached someone moving steadily toward them with a purposeful stride. A man in a dark green coat, fur-lined hood pulled back just enough to reveal his stern jawline and deep brown eyes. His boots crunched over the snow with calm confidence. He looked to be in his early 40s, tall, rugged, with a well-kept beard trimmed close to his face. His name was Caleb Foster, a maintenance worker for the county, and someone Jack had called that morning before taking the children to get warm food. Caleb had the physical presence of someone used to long winters and heavy labor, his shoulders broad and posture straight. But his eyes told a different story, eyes that had seen loss perhaps more than he ever spoke about. When he reached them, he offered a slow nod. "You must be Laura," he said, voice low and steady. "Jack told me you might need a ride." Laura instinctively tightened her grip on Grace's hand. Caleb noticed, but didn't seem offended. Instead, he lowered his voice. "Storm's blowing fast. You'll freeze out here before you get anywhere." There was no pressure in his tone, just quiet fact. Laura looked at her children, then at the sky. The wind howled in agreement. She nodded. "Thank you. We'd appreciate it." Caleb led them toward his truck, a sturdy older Ford with chains on the tires, the kind of vehicle built to fight Minnesota winters. As he opened the rear door, he gave the children a reassuring glance. "Hop in. It's warm." The heater blasted heat that felt almost unreal after the bus ride. Eli sighed, curling into the seat as warmth thawed his small body. When the truck pulled away from the station, Laura watched the town fade behind them. Ahead stretched a snowy road winding through the wilderness toward a property she had never heard of left by someone she had never known. Toward the beginning of something new, or the unraveling of everything she thought she understood about her life. Snow whipped across the windshield in frantic spirals as Caleb's truck pushed deeper into the rural outskirts of Grand Rapids. The road narrowed into a single lane carved between walls of towering pines bowed under their winter burdens. Laura sat in the passenger seat, her fingers interlaced tightly in her lap. The closer they drove, the more her heartbeat seemed to sync with the rattle of the truck's engine, nervous, uneven, uncertain. She stared through the glass, watching the forest shift from dense woodland to what looked like untouched wilderness. Grace, huddled next to Noah in the back seat, kept whispering questions where they were going, what the house looked like, whether it had a bed or at least a stove. Noah answered in hushed tones, trying to sound older than he felt. Eli slept again, small face pressed against Noah's shoulder, his breath fogging the window in slow, fragile puffs. Caleb glanced at Laura, sensing her tension. "We're close," he said, his deep voice steady as a logging river. Up close, his rough features softened slightly. Dark brows, a hint of lines at the corners of his eyes, a beard trimmed neatly against a strong jaw. Not unkind, just shaped by long seasons of cold and solitude. "Place hasn't been lived in for a while," he added. "These parts don't get much traffic except hunters and folks looking for quiet." Laura nodded, though her chest tightened even more. Quiet could mean peace or danger. After another 15 minutes of winding through trees, the truck turned onto an unmarked path swallowed by snow. Caleb shifted into a lower gear. "This is the driveway, if you can call it that," he muttered. Their wheels crunched through snow branches, scraping the doors with brittle skeletal fingers. Finally, the forest opened into a small clearing. There, sitting hunched beneath a blanket of white, was the house. It wasn't large, more a cabin than a home, but even through the heavy snowfall it carried the weary dignity of something that had endured more winters than anyone alive remembered. The exterior was darkened wood, warped in some places and faded in others. The slanted roof was draped in nearly a foot of snow, some of it sliding off in wet chunks as the truck stopped. A narrow chimney cracked, but standing firm, poked upward like a tired sentinel. The windows were clouded with frost from the inside, giving them a ghostly opacity, as if the house refused to reveal its interior. One shutter dangled crookedly by a single rusty screw, knocking against the siding with each gust of wind. The front door hung unevenly, one hinge broken, the other groaning under the weight of the wood. Caleb cut the engine. "This is the address," he said quietly, as if not wanting to disturb something ancient. Laura's breath froze mid-inhale. This was her inheritance, a cabin collapsing into the wilderness. Something inside her twisted disappointment, fear, and a flicker of hope, all tangled into one knot. At least it was real. At least it wasn't a trick. She stepped out of the truck, boots sinking into the soft snow with a muted crunch. The cold slapped her immediately, stealing her breath. She pulled her coat tighter and helped the children down. Noah surveyed the cabin with narrowed eyes. "It looks old," he said carefully. Grace slipped her small gloved hand into Laura's. "Does anyone live here?" "Not for a long time," Laura murmured. Caleb walked ahead and tested the steps leading up to the porch. They creaked beneath his weight, but held. "Be careful," he warned. "These boards freeze and crack." He pushed the door gently. The broken hinge gave way with a long pained moan, and the door swung open, revealing a wash of cold, stale air. Inside, the house was dim and quiet. Laura stepped in first. The floorboards were worn, dust layered thick enough to keep footprints for weeks. Cobwebs hung like ghost lace in the corners. The living room was small, a single room with a stone fireplace blackened by soot. Animal tracks, likely raccoon or fox, crossed the floor. A wooden table sat askew in the center, one leg missing. A toppled chair lay on its side, its seat split. Against one wall stood a tall, narrow cabinet with glass panels so fogged they may as well have been painted white. A faded rug, curled at the edges, stretched beneath the debris. Grace whimpered softly and pressed her face into Laura's coat. Eli clutched Noah's hand, wide-eyed and silent. Noah walked a few steps forward, running a finger along the dusty table. "No one's been here for forever," he said. Laura's voice, when it came, was quieter than she meant it to be. "It's not much, but it's shelter." The weight of those words settled on her shoulders. Shelter. A roof. A door that closed. Maybe a fire if the chimney wasn't blocked. After months of drifting like leaves caught in wind, even this ruin felt like a small miracle. Caleb stepped inside behind them. He surveyed the place with a practiced, knowledgeable eye. "Structure's rough," he said, "but it's standing. That's something." He approached the fireplace, crouching to inspect it. "Looks like it was used not too long before it was abandoned. Someone probably lived here off and on." Laura froze. Off and on, Caleb nodded. Hunters. Wanderers. Folks who move quietly. He didn't elaborate, but she sensed he meant people like her people trying to survive. He stood and walked toward the back door, peering through the dirty window. "There's an old shed out there. Probably not safe to enter in this weather." Laura inhaled deeply, letting the musty air settle in her lungs. She felt the weight of the house around her, its silence, its loneliness, its fragile dignity. Something about it stirred an ache she didn't expect. This house had been waiting. Maybe for anyone. Maybe for her. Grace tugged her sleeve. "Mommy, can we stay here?" Her voice wavered between fear and hope. Noah looked at Laura, eyes serious. "We can fix it. At least make it warm." Laura placed a hand on his head. He was trying so hard to be strong, to be the adult she shouldn't force him to be. "We'll try," she said gently. Caleb cleared his throat. "I can help you get a fire going," he offered. "And bring some supplies tomorrow. Blankets, maybe tools." Laura turned to him, surprised by his kindness. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he replied simply. "But I will." His tone held no pity, only a quiet sense of duty. Someone had once helped him, she realized. Someone whose memory he carried. The wind outside howled, slamming against the broken shutter. The house creaked in response, as though acknowledging their presence. As Caleb stepped back onto the snowy porch, he looked at Laura one more time. "Storm's picking up," he said. "Stay inside. Block the cracks with whatever you can. I'll be back in the morning." Then he disappeared into the swirling white. Inside the cabin, Laura stood in the center of the room, the children gathered around her. The cold pressed in from every angle, but something warmer flickered beneath her ribs, a small, stubborn flame refusing to go out. They had arrived. They had shelter. And something about this old house whispered that its secrets were just beginning to wake. The storm quieted into a soft, unending whisper as daylight crept cautiously across the clearing the next morning. The cabin, still half frozen and trembling under the weight of the night's snowfall, greeted Laura and her children with the fragile hope of survival, rather than comfort. The cold inside was biting, settling into the corners of the walls and sneaking beneath the blankets they had used to cover the broken windows. Noah was the first to wake. He sat up slowly, the breath from his small chest turning into pale fog. His dark hair stuck in wild angles from the cold and from sleeping on the hardwood floor. He had insisted on taking the corner closest to the door, just in case something came inside, a mixture of childhood fear and the premature protectiveness that had grown in him far too young. Laura brushed a hand gently across his head before stirring the others. Grace blinked awake with a soft, sleepy whimper curling deeper into Laura's side. Eli clung to the blanket like it was a living creature offering warmth. Laura's bones ached from sleeping on the dusty floor, but she forced herself upright, steadying her breath. Today, she needed strength. Today, they needed to make this house, this strange inheritance, livable, even if only temporarily. As they ate stale bread saved from the diner, Noah began exploring the room again, running his fingers over the warped wooden planks, the faded wallpaper, and the abandoned furniture that looked too tired to remember its purpose. "Mom," he said as he knelt beside a corner of the living room, "this board is weird." Laura looked over, weary but alert. "What do you mean?" "It moves," he answered, pressing his small palm against one of the planks. It gave easily under his touch, shifting with a soft creak that did not belong to normal floorboards. Laura knelt beside him. The wood was slightly raised at one corner, as if time itself had pushed it upward. She pried at the edge with her fingernails, and to her surprise it lifted cleanly, no nails, no resistance. Beneath it, a dark, empty space breathed out a rush of cold air so sharp it felt almost alive. Grace gasped and immediately grabbed Laura's sleeve. "Is it a monster hole?" she whispered. Eli, half awake, stared from across the room with big, round eyes. Noah, however, leaned closer with a mix of bravery and fear. "There's a ladder," he said quietly. Sure enough, a narrow wooden ladder descended into complete darkness, its rungs old-worn and slightly damp. A dusty smell, earth-old wood, something metallic wafted up from the space below. Laura hesitated. A hidden room. A concealed entrance. People did not hide things under floorboards unless they had a reason. For a moment she wondered if she should wait for Caleb, who had promised to return later in the day. But Caleb was a stranger, even if a helpful one. Whatever was below this floor belonged to her now. And after years of having nothing, the idea of leaving something unexplored felt unbearable. "Stay here," she said softly to the children. "Don't move." She tested the ladder with her foot. It groaned, but held. Heart pounding, she descended slowly, her hand sliding across the cold wooden rail. Darkness swallowed her until she reached the bottom. It was a small, unfinished basement, more of a storage pit than a true room. The air was heavy, thick with age, and carried the faint smell of damp metal. Laura clicked on her phone's flashlight. The dim beam revealed the outline of a large object pushed against the far wall. A trunk, an old iron chest with rust creeping across its hinges like frozen vines. Mom Noah's voice echoed faintly from above. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay," she called back, though her heart raced violently. "Just hold on." She approached the trunk, the floor cold beneath her feet. The chest was heavy, its surface scarred by time. A simple latch held it closed. With trembling fingers she lifted it. The lid creaked open slowly, as if reluctant to reveal its contents. Inside, instead of treasure or cash or anything remotely valuable, lay stacks of bound papers, journals wrapped in twine, faded maps with ink bleeding at the edges, envelopes yellowed with age, and a metal case no larger than a book. Laura picked up one of the journals. The handwriting was delicate looping, written in a deep black ink that had mellowed into brown. The first page read Margaret Hale, 1984. A name. A pulse of recognition. Hale. Hadn't the county registry mentioned someone named Hale when listing the property's former ownership? Laura opened another page. The mine collapse is worse than anyone knows. They buried the truth with the rubble. If I don't write this down, it will vanish like the men who died that day. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold rippled through her. She lifted one of the maps. It showed an area north of Grand Rapids' dense forest, an old mining road, and a marked location labeled Site K-17. Beneath it, scribbled sharply, "Do not trust the company. Document everything." Laura's breath faltered. What kind of truth was hidden here? Why had someone hidden these things beneath the floorboards, and why had the property been left specifically to her, someone with no family, no past connections, nothing but a name and a lifeline, stretching thin? She swallowed. There was something else inside the chest, the metal case. She opened it. Inside lay a small stack of photographs, grainy black and white images of men in hard hats standing near a mining tunnel. Some smiled, others looked weary. On the back of each photo, written in the same looping script, were names and dates, and next to some of the names, small crosses were drawn. Not symbols, graves. "Mom." Noah's voice trembled now. "Can we come down?" "Stay up there," she said quickly. Her voice sounded louder than she intended. Noah paused. "Is it dangerous?" Laura looked around the cramped basement. The shadows seemed too thick, the silence too heavy. But this was not danger. This was truth long buried, hidden deliberately, and now found. "No," she said gentler. "It's just old things. I'll bring them up." She gathered the journal's maps and photos, stacking them carefully. When she climbed back up the ladder, Noah's anxious face was the first thing she saw, followed closely by Grace's wide eyes and Eli's sleepy stare. "What is it?" Noah asked. Laura set the heavy materials on the floor. "History," she said softly. "Someone hid history here." Grace tilted her head. "Good history, or bad history?" Laura brushed a hand through her daughter's hair. "I don't know yet." They gathered around the old trunk contents like archaeologists discovering artifacts from a world forgotten. Laura chose one journal and began to flip through the pages. The children couldn't read the words, but they sensed the seriousness in her expression. These documents weren't random. They were intentional, and they carried weight. Suddenly, a soft knock sounded at the front door. The sound cut cleanly through the stillness. Noah stiffened. Grace gasped. Eli crawled into Laura's lap. She stood slowly. The knock came again, gentle but firm. She opened the door. Caleb stood there, snow-dusting his hair and beard breath puffing out in controlled clouds. "You doing all right?" he asked. Then he noticed her expression. "What happened?" Laura stepped aside. "You need to see this." The wind pressed against the cabin walls like a restless spirit trying to reclaim the secrets inside. Caleb stepped into the doorway, slowly brushing snow from his coat, his heavy boots leaving damp prints on the wooden floor. His dark, steady eyes shifted from Laura to the pile of journals, maps, and photographs scattered across the floorboards. Something in his expression tightened not fear, but recognition of a truth too heavy to ignore. Laura knelt among the items, her fingers trembling slightly as she picked up one of the journals again. Caleb crouched beside her, the cold still clinging to his beard and the collar of his coat. "You found this under the floor?" he asked, voice low. "Yes," Laura answered. There was a hidden hatch. It looked like no one's touched it for years. Caleb exhaled slowly, running a hand through his short dark hair. His posture, usually relaxed and grounded, now held an edge of caution. "These woods keep old stories," he said softly. "Not all of them peaceful." He reached for the map eyes, scanning the faded ink lines. His brow furrowed. "This is the northern ridge. No one goes there anymore. It's been blocked off since the collapse." Laura's stomach tightened. "The journals mention that. They say the company hid what happened." Caleb nodded grimly. "They did more than hide it." Laura looked up at him sharply. "You know something." Caleb hesitated, pulling in a slow breath. "Everyone around here knows a little. The mine belonged to the Lorne Mining Company, biggest employer in Grand Rapids back in the day, but in '86 the shaft collapsed. They said it was a natural cave-in." His jaw flexed, his voice dropping. "But nobody believed it." Laura swallowed. "Why?" "Because natural caves don't crush a dozen men in under 3 minutes," Caleb said. "Not when safety reports had been ignored for months." He paused. And Margaret Hale, she was the only employee who walked away. Grace crawled into Laura's lap, her small hands gripping her mother's coat. "Who is she, Mommy?" Laura wrapped an arm around her. "We're trying to find out." Caleb reached for one of the journals. The first page had Margaret's name in looping pen strokes, but the ink had softened with time. He opened it carefully. October 3rd, 1984. They won't listen. The supervisors laugh when I bring up the structural cracks. They said the mine's been here longer than I've been alive, and it'll be here long after I die. But the cracks are growing. I can hear the walls breathe. I can feel the ground shift. Caleb's hand tightened around the book. Laura saw the flicker in his eyes, a shadow of grief. "My dad worked evenings at the mine," he said quietly. "I was 9 when it collapsed." Laura's breath caught. She hadn't known. Caleb had carried this weight for decades, invisible beneath his calm exterior. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know." Caleb shook his head. "No one talks about it. The company paid off the families, closed the mine, and shut everyone up. The truth has been buried so deep, no one even remembers what it looks like." He tapped the journal. "Except her." He opened another entry. December 12, 1985. "Lorne's men told me to stop writing. They said I'm making trouble where there is none. But trouble is all I see. The beams are rotten. The earth is shifting. The men are tired. And I know, God help me, I know they're planning something. If I disappear, let whoever finds this understand it wasn't an accident." Laura felt the room thicken with silence. Snow continued to fall outside, but inside the walls seemed to hold their breath. Noah sat close knees pulled to his chest. "Did she disappear?" he asked quietly. Caleb nodded slowly. "People said she left town. Others said she hid somewhere deep in the forest. No one ever found a body. The house changed hands, mostly abandoned, until it went into the county records." Laura's fingers tightened around the edge of a photograph. It showed Margaret standing beside the mine entrance, hair pulled into a loose bun. She was in her mid-30s, slender, tall, with a determined expression. Her features were delicate, but focused the kind of face formed by intelligence rather than vanity. She had pale skin, fierce, dark eyes, and a slight tension around the mouth that hinted at years spent speaking truths no one wanted to hear. Margaret Hale looked like a woman who had fought battles with her mind alone and paid for it with her life. Laura felt a strange connection to her, not because of the mystery, but because of the loneliness etched into her eyes. The same loneliness Laura had known all her life. She brushed the dust off another envelope. Inside were typed pages, safety reports, internal letters, payroll sheets. Some dated months before the collapse. Many had red stamps across them, denied, dismissed, unnecessary. Beneath them were handwritten notes from Margaret. They knew. They all knew. Noah crawled closer. "Mom, what are we going to do with it?" Laura stared at the pile. Each paper was heavy, heavy with truth, heavy with pain, heavy with someone's last attempt to save lives. "We have to understand it first," she said, "then figure out why it was left to us." Caleb stood pacing slowly, a man wrestling with ghosts. "This isn't just old paperwork. These could destroy people if they're true." Laura met his eyes. Or set things right. Caleb hesitated, torn between caution and the ache of a son who had never received answers. Maybe he conceded. "But this is dangerous. Companies like Lorne didn't bury mistakes, they buried people." Laura closed the journal. Whoever left this wanted the truth to be found. Grace tugged Laura's sleeve. "Is she watching us?" Laura smiled faintly, brushing her daughter's hair. "Maybe she's been waiting." The room felt colder suddenly, as though Margaret's story had seeped into the walls themselves. Outside, a gust of wind slammed against the shutters, making them rattle like loose bones. Eli whimpered and clung to Noah. Laura gathered the journals into her arms as if they were precious. Because they were. They were the final words of a woman whose voice had been silenced. Caleb moved toward the door. "I need to talk to someone," he said. "Someone who may know more." "I'll be back." "Be careful," Laura said. He nodded. She watched him step into the storm, the snow swallowing his tall frame until he vanished into white. The children huddled around her. Laura felt the weight of Margaret's truth, the weight of the years, the weight of the house that had chosen her. And somewhere deep beneath the floorboards she sensed that this was only the beginning. A door had opened, and the past was stepping through. The morning broke with a dim metallic light, the kind that barely pierced the dense winter sky. Snow still drifted lazily across the clearing, settling on the roof of the cabin like a veil meant to hide more than it revealed. Inside, the remnants of Margaret Hale's journals lay spread across the warped floorboards as if the house itself had exhaled secrets it had held for decades. Laura sat cross-legged among the papers, the old map carefully unfolded in front of her. Its edges were frayed a corner, torn, the ink faded into soft, bruised lines, but the path it showed was unmistakable. A long, narrow trail through the northern forest. A marked spot labeled only K-17. Underneath, in Margaret's distinct handwriting, where they buried more than men. The words unsettled something deep inside Laura. She felt them like a pulse beneath the paper, steady and insistent. Noah knelt beside her, his brown eyes sharp with curiosity and concern. "Are we going there?" he asked softly. Laura hesitated, studying his face. He'd changed so much in such a short time, 10 years old, but wearing responsibility like a coat that didn't fit yet. "I think we have to," she said. Margaret wanted this found. Grace looked up from the corner where she'd been wrapping her scarf around her neck twice for extra warmth. "But it's cold, Mommy," she said, a small tremor in her voice. Eli nodded vigorously, his cheeks already flushed pink beneath the thin wool hat. "Cold," he echoed. Laura brushed a hand through Grace's hair. "We won't go far, just enough to see what Margaret left for us." Behind her, the cabin door creaked open. Snow-laced wind blew in before Caleb stepped through, boots thudding heavily against the floor. He carried a small canvas bag of supplies, blankets, canned food, a metal thermos, likely gathered in haste from his own home. His expression tightened when he saw the map in Laura's hands. "We're going north," he asked bluntly, brushing the frost from his beard. Laura straightened. "We need to see it. Margaret wrote everything for a reason. The collapse, the lies, Dios. This location, it's connected." Caleb's jaw worked, a muscle twitching beneath his stubbled cheek. "That trail is nearly impassable this time of year. Snow's too deep. Wolves roam up there." Grace shrank back at the word wolves. Caleb noticed immediately and softened his tone. "They won't come near if we stay alert, but it's not safe to go far." "We won't," Laura assured him. "Just far enough to understand." He stared at her for a long moment, measuring stubbornness, fear, determination, and then sighed deeply. "If you're going, I'm coming with you." Laura felt a flicker of unexpected warmth at his resolve. "Thank you. But you don't have to. I know," he cut her off gently, "but I also know what's out there." He pulled out a small flashlight from his bag, checked the batteries, then motioned to Noah. "Get your boots on, kiddo. Make sure the laces are tight." Noah brightened, scrambling to help his siblings. Grace struggled with her gloves, fingers stiff from the cold, while Eli simply waddled toward Laura with his arms raised until she lifted him and tucked his scarf closer round his tiny neck. Caleb scanned the journals again. "North Ridge," he muttered. "Last time anyone went near K-17 was 25 years ago. That whole area was fenced off by the company." "Because it's dangerous?" Laura asked. Caleb shook his head. "Because it holds the truth." They stepped outside into air so sharp it felt like needles on their cheeks. The forest loomed ahead, dark, tall, unforgiving. Snow stretched in every direction, pristine and untouched, except for the narrow path left by deer. The sky hung low heavy with the threat of another storm. Caleb walked ahead, clearing a path with his long strides. The children followed closely, their breath forming pale clouds that vanished into the cold. The trees grew denser as they went, branches sagging with ice. The world felt muffled, as if nature itself demanded silence in exchange for safe passage. Noah walked beside Laura, half excited, half cautious. "Do you think Margaret came here alone?" he asked. Laura squeezed his shoulder gently. "She must have. She didn't have anyone else." "Like us?" he whispered. The question pierced her heart. She brushed her thumb against his cheek. "Not anymore." They continued deeper into the woods. The ground rose slightly, and soon the snow reached their calves. Grace stumbled, but Caleb lifted her quickly, settling her on a fallen log for a moment of rest. "Don't push yourself," he said gently to her. His voice, usually stern, became soft, almost fatherly. Grace nodded, wiping snow from her lashes. "Are we close?" Laura checked the map again, rotating it with shaking fingers. "A little further," she said. "Just past that ridge." Caleb took the map from her carefully. "Let me lead. The land changes out here after storms. What used to be trails can turn into sinkholes." They walked another 7 minutes before Caleb stopped abruptly and raised his hand for silence. In front of them, half buried under a mound of snow, was a collapsed structure made of rusted metal and timber. It looked like the remains of a small entrance, triangular beams, broken ground, sunken, the darkness beneath, concealed by frost and shadow. "This is it," Caleb said quietly. "The old maintenance tunnel." Laura's breath caught. Beneath the collapsed beams was a narrow black space, one that seemed to breathe cold upward, the air shifting like something alive. Noah stepped closer, curiosity overtaking caution. "What's down there?" Caleb grabbed his shoulder quickly. "Careful! The ground might give." They examined the entrance from a safer angle. On one of the partially buried beams, faded paint formed the ghost of a number, K-17. Laura felt her heart thud painfully. Margaret had marked this place intentionally. This wasn't random. This was the core of everything. "There's something else," Caleb said suddenly. He brushed snow away from a wooden post on the right side of the tunnel entrance. Carved faintly into the wood was a message, not an accident. Beneath it, "Find the rest." Laura felt a tremor go through her, not fear, but the electric spark of recognition. This wasn't just a sight, it was a confession carved into the earth. Grace tugged lightly at Laura's coat. "Mommy, can we go home now?" Her voice quivered. Laura gathered her daughter close. "Yes, baby, we've seen enough for today." As they turned back through the forest, the weight of what they had found pressed heavily on her chest. The journals had painted a picture, but this broken entrance proved that Margaret hadn't been paranoid. She had been right. Someone had buried the truth, and someone had meant for it to stay buried. The snow continued falling, but Laura no longer felt the cold. She felt Margaret's presence urging her forward. The truth wasn't fully found yet. It had only just begun to surface. The wind had grown sharper by the time Laura, her children, and Caleb approached the collapsed entrance again the following morning. The forest seemed heavier than before, as if the trees themselves sensed what lay hidden beneath the earth and were reluctant to let it be disturbed. The sky stretched low and pale, a solid ceiling of winter pressing down over the land. Snow clung to every branch, muting the sound of their footsteps as they trudged toward K-17, each breath rising like ghosts between them. Caleb walked ahead, scanning the ground with the practiced caution of someone who had lived long enough in these woods to respect their dangers. His thick jacket, dark green like moss, rustled each time he shifted his weight. Stubble shadowed his jaw, and his eyes, deep-set and dark, held the grim knowledge of a man who had lost more than he ever admitted. Behind him, Laura guided Grace and Eli while Noah walked close at her side, clutching the folded map like it was a compass pointing toward truth. Laura's own nerves pulsed beneath her skin, a steady ache of fear balanced by a growing sense of duty. She felt Margaret Hale's presence in every step, as if the woman's determination had seeped into the soil and lodged itself inside her chest. When the collapsed beams finally came into view, Caleb slowed, lifting a gloved hand. "There," he said. Fresh drift. Snow had piled higher over the tunnel entrance overnight, creating a slanted white mound that looked deceptively harmless. Caleb approached cautiously, crouching as he brushed away loose frost. Beneath the surface, the faint outline of something metallic gleamed dully. "There's a door here," he muttered. Laura knelt beside him. "You're sure?" Caleb nodded. "It's old, maybe welded shut, maybe not." He used the edge of a small metal bar from his pack to scrape more snow away. As the mound thinned, the distinct shape of a square metal hatch emerged, rusted but intact, its surface nearly white with frozen condensation. A wheel-shaped handle sat at the center, stiff with decades of cold. Margaret's handwriting in the journals came back to Laura in a vivid rush, references to backup tunnels, emergency shelters, off-the-record storage rooms. They hide the truth where no sunlight reaches. Laura touched the frozen handle, her gloved fingers trembling. Noah held onto her coat. "Mom, that's really it." She nodded slowly. "It has to be." Caleb stepped beside her. "Let me try." He gripped the wheel jaw, tightening. His muscles strained as he heaved his weight into the motion. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a loud metallic crack that echoed through the forest, the wheel shifted a fraction. He pushed harder. The frozen seal broke, snow sliding off in clumps. With a groan, the hatch swung open, releasing a burst of icy air from the darkness below. Grace whimpered and hid behind Laura's legs. Eli clung to his sister. Laura swallowed, forcing her breath to steady. The darkness felt alive, like an exhalation from a world buried beneath time. Caleb clicked on his flashlight and aimed it down the ladder. The beam revealed a narrow tunnel reinforced with metal walls coated in frost, the air shimmering with cold. "It's stable," he said. "Old, but stable." Noah Brave, despite shaking hands, whispered, "Can we go?" Laura hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Only a few steps down. Stay close." Caleb descended first, his boots clanging softly against the metal rungs. Laura climbed after him, Noah close behind, then Grace and Eli guided by Laura's reassuring touch. As their feet touched the tunnel floor, their breaths formed thick clouds. The corridor ahead stretched into a narrow, frost-covered throat of steel. Frozen pipes lined the walls. Their footsteps echoed in a rhythmic, metallic beat. After several paces, Caleb lifted his hand, stopping them. "Look." At the end of the tunnel, illuminated by the dim glow of his flashlight, stood an old door, heavy reinforced and coated with a thick glaze of ice. Unlike the hatch outside, this one bore a plate of tarnished brass. The engraving was faint but legible: Storage Room C, restricted access. Beneath it, a small Lorne Mining Company emblem. Laura felt her pulse quicken. "This is where she wanted us to go," she whispered. Caleb pressed his shoulder against the door and shoved. It resisted at first, ice cracking around its edges like brittle glass. Then, slowly, it creaked open. Cold air spilled out, colder than the tunnel, as if the room had not felt warmth or breath in decades. The flashlight beam cut across the interior. Laura froze. Against the left wall stood a steel filing cabinet with multiple drawers, some dented, some labeled with faded tape. Next to it was a safe, its outer surface dusted with frost, but otherwise intact. A metal table sat in the center of the room, piled with tape reels, notebooks, and manila folders tied with brittle strings. On the right wall hung shelves stacked with boxes, dozens of them, each stamped with Lorne Mining Company logos and numbered sequentially. The air smelled of rust and old paper. Caleb stepped farther in. This is an archive. Laura approached slowly, feeling as though she was crossing the threshold into Margaret's mind. Noah pointed at the safe. Mom, what's in there? Caleb crouched, running his fingers along the dial. Older model, he said. Not complicated. Laura retrieved a small notebook from the table. Its first page contained a series of combinations likely written by Margaret. Her handwriting trembled with urgency. Try this, she said, showing it to Caleb. With careful precision, he entered the code. The safe clicked. The heavy door swung open with an echoing groan that felt like the release of decades. Inside were stacks of documents, official memos, structural reports, signed affidavits, and 2 thick binders labeled Incident K-17 and Confidential Payroll Deductions. Tucked into one side was a small black recording device wrapped in wax paper to protect it from moisture. Laura lifted it gently. Noah leaned closer. Is that a voice recorder? Yes, she whispered. An old one. Grace peered at the binders. What does it mean? Laura opened the first binder. A photo fell out, a group of miners' faces smudged with dust, smiling at the camera. On the back, Margaret had written, They deserve more than silence. Laura's throat tightened. Caleb picked up a report from a folder on the table. As he scanned the contents, anger carved itself into his expression. These are internal warnings, he said, voice taut. They knew the beams were failing. They knew the cost-cutting. He flipped another page. God, they hid this. Laura opened another envelope. Inside were signed letters from supervisors acknowledging the dangers but dismissing them as minor inconveniences. She felt sick. This wasn't just evidence. This was truth screamed into paper. Margaret saved all of this, Laura whispered. She hid it because she knew the company would destroy it. Caleb nodded, and she left it to the one person they'd never expect. Laura looked at him. But why me? Caleb hesitated, then answered quietly, Because you're someone who knows what it means to be ignored. Someone who won't let the truth be buried. The tunnel shuddered faintly as a gust of wind passed through the entrance above. Noah clutched Laura's sleeve. Mom, can we go now? She closed the binder. Yes, we have what we need. They carried the documents, tapes, maps, and journals, carefully climbing back toward the pale light leaking into the tunnel. As they emerged from the frozen darkness, Laura felt a shift inside her, something bold and burning. The truth had been buried, but she was not going to let it stay underground. She had found Margaret's voice, and now she intended to speak it. The news broke like a crack in thick ice, slow at first, carried in murmurs through the narrow streets of Grand Rapids, then erupting into something far louder than Laura could have ever imagined. Winter still gripped Minnesota with its white fists, but something warmer began moving beneath the surface of the season. Something restless. Something unstoppable. It began the morning after Laura and Caleb carried the evidence into the county sheriff's office, a squat brick building with narrow frosted windows and a front desk that smelled of old coffee and wet boots. The sheriff, a broad-shouldered man named Edgar Rourke, had regarded them with a mixture of disbelief and weariness when they first walked in. Edgar was in his late 50s, with thinning gray hair and a trimmed beard that framed a face carved with deep creases from decades of worry. His eyes were the color of tarnished steel, hard-tired but not unkind. He had the look of a man who had spent too long trying to keep an entire county stitched together with the thread of limited resources and even fewer officers. He had a reputation for being strict but fair, the kind of sheriff who mediated disputes personally and remembered every resident's name. Yet even he had not expected the avalanche Laura brought. "Where did you get all this?" he had asked, voice gravelly. Laura had stood straighter, her thin frame steadying under the weight of truth. "From the house I inherited," she said. "From Margaret Hale." At the mention of that name, Edgar's jaw tightened. Something flickered across his expression: recognition, regret, maybe even fear. But he said nothing. Instead, he and his deputy, a young woman named Anna Briggs, began opening boxes, unfolding maps, scanning documents, and playing the old voice recordings. Anna, only in her mid-20s, had a sharp, fox-like face framed by short auburn hair and freckles across her nose. She was quick observant and spoke little, but her eyes widened several times as she flipped through the materials. "This is substantial," Anna murmured. "This is everything," Edgar corrected, voice low. "Everything this county tried to forget." He sent them home with a promise, an honest one, to review every page. Within 48 hours, something shifted. County officials appeared. Lawyers arrived from neighboring towns. Families of the miners, most of whom had left Grand Rapids long ago, began calling, asking whether the rumors were true. And then, the story leaked. Local reporters, all bundled in oversized coats, began appearing outside the sheriff's office. The Lorne Mining Company, long thought dormant, issued a stiff defensive statement that only made people angrier. And at the center of it all, unintentionally, stood Laura Bennett, a former homeless mother with 3 children. A woman with no connections, no money, no influence. A woman who had stumbled into a truth others had buried with deliberate cruelty. Reporters wanted to speak with her. Politicians issued comments. Lawyers demanded interviews. She refused them all. She didn't want the spotlight. She wanted justice for the men Margaret Hale had tried to save. Caleb stayed close throughout the chaos. If before he had been a guide through the woods, now he was something steadier, firmer, a pillar holding back the whirlwind. He drove her to meetings. He watched the kids when reporters knocked on the cabin door. He read through dozens of the documents with her late into the night, his tired eyes glowing with determination. One evening, as they sat near the newly repaired fireplace, he spoke quietly. "My father, he deserved this truth," he said. "They all did. Thank you for doing what no one else had the courage to do." Laura felt her throat tighten. "It wasn't courage," she said softly. "It was the only right thing left to do." Caleb studied her face with an intensity she wasn't used to. Sometimes the right thing is the hardest thing. Before she could respond, Noah walked into the room with Grace and Eli trailing behind, each wrapped in blankets. They had grown more relaxed over the past days, their fear of the cold replaced by cautious optimism. Grace climbed into Laura's lap. "Mommy," she murmured, "are people mad at you?" Laura kissed her forehead. "Some are," she admitted, "but more people are grateful, and we did the right thing." Grace nodded sleepily. "Margaret wanted us to." Yes, Laura thought, and she will not be forgotten anymore. The following week brought the breakthrough no one expected. The county attorney's office confirmed the authenticity of all documents. A motion was filed to reopen the investigation into the 1986 mine collapse. The Lorne Mining Company, now operating under a different name, was forced into the public eye, again dragged back into the history it tried so desperately to bury. Lawsuits emerged. Settlements were negotiated. Families whose husbands, fathers, and brothers had died in the collapse were awarded compensation millions in total. For the first time in nearly 40 years, their grief was recognized. Their truth was spoken aloud. When the official press conference took place at the county hall, Laura refused to sit at the front with the officials. She sat in the back row holding Eli in her lap, Grace beside her, Noah, leaning forward eagerly. But she was called anyway. The county commissioner, a tall woman named Rebecca Lindholm, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled into a severe bun, stood at the podium. Rebecca, known for her stern posture and uncompromising demeanor, was a seasoned politician who rarely displayed emotion. Yet that day, her voice softened. This truth, Rebecca said, came to light because of the courage of one woman, a woman who had every reason to stay silent, yet chose to speak for those who could not. Laura froze, her heart thumping painfully. Rebecca turned toward her. Laura Bennett, on behalf of Itasca County, thank you. The audience families of Miners County workers, local residents, rose to their feet. The applause rolled through the room like warm thunder. Laura felt tears sting her eyes. Noah squeezed her hand. Grace leaned into her. Eli clapped without understanding why. After the press conference, Rebecca approached her privately. Up close, the commissioner's severe expression softened slightly. "There's more," she said. "The county has decided to establish a community fund to support families in crisis housing assistance, emergency aid, legal help." Laura listened, unsure where this was going. Rebecca continued, "We need someone to oversee the program, someone who understands hardship, someone who's proven she can handle responsibility." She paused. "We want you to manage it." Laura blinked. "Me?" Rebecca nodded. "If you're willing." Laura's throat tightened. She wasn't used to being chosen for anything. Poverty had taught her she was invisible unless she made noise. But here she was, being seen. She looked at her children, at Caleb, waiting across the room, his warm, steady gaze quietly encouraging her. She nodded slowly. "I'll do it." With that, something inside her shifted like ice melting under the first touch of spring. Their lives changed swiftly. A small office was offered to her in Grand Rapids. The county arranged temporary housing until the cabin could be properly restored. Donations poured in clothes, food, even toys for the children. The community, once indifferent, now embraced them. For the first time, Laura felt rooted, not drifting, not surviving, but finally living. Winter still coated Minnesota. The snow still fell. But to Laura and her children, the world felt different now. Lighter, warmer, filled with possibility. The road ahead was no longer buried beneath ice. It stretched wide and open like a promise. The first true thaw of the season had not yet arrived, but something gentler had begun settling over the old cabin on the edge of Grand Rapids. Snow still lay deep across the forest, glowing faintly beneath a pale blue morning sky. But the winds had softened, losing the sharp bite that once gnawed at exposed skin. In its place was a quiet hush, as if the land itself was pausing, waiting, listening, preparing. Inside the restored cabin, warmth pulsed steadily from the modern wood-burning stove the county had installed just days before. The scent of fresh pine logs mingled with faint traces of old timber, a reminder of the house's long memory of secrets once buried, but now given purpose. Laura stood near the window, watching a thin plume of smoke rise from the chimney. Her breath fogged lightly against the cold glass. The woman reflected in the window pane no longer looked like the exhausted mother she had been when she first arrived in Grand Rapids, a woman with too thin cheeks. Dark circles under her eyes and uncertainty carved into her posture. She still bore the same pale skin and long dark hair, streaked with strands of early gray, but there was something new beneath the surface. Strength, direction, hope. Things she had once believed existed only for other people. Behind her, Noah was hammering the last nail into a wooden bunk frame. The boy's face, usually serious for his age, now glowed with a pride he didn't quite know how to hide. His dark hair fell over his forehead as he worked, and his quick hands moved with surprising confidence. "Mom," he said, stepping back to admire the frame, "I think this will hold 2 kids, maybe 3 if they're small." Laura smiled. "It looks wonderful, sweetheart." Grace and Eli sat nearby on a pile of folded blankets, sorting donated winter coats. Grace, with her soft features and wispy blonde curls, held each coat up to examine it, judging by both color and warmth. Eli, chubby-cheeked and earnest, simply mimicked whatever she did. Their giggles filled the cabin like soft chimes. Footsteps sounded on the porch before the door swung open. Caleb stepped inside, carrying a box labeled kitchen supplies. Snow dotted the shoulders of his thick brown jacket, melting into droplets on the wool fabric. His breath fogged as he spoke. "Delivery from the community center," he said, setting the box down. Rebecca sent more blankets too, and Edgar dropped off canned goods. He brushed a hand over his short dark hair, shaking off lingering snow. The firelight caught the hardened angles of his face, the strong jaw, the slight stubble, the eyes that always seemed to hold more weight than he voiced. He looked at the bunk frame and nodded approvingly. "You built that?" he asked Noah. Noah puffed his chest slightly. "Yes, sir." Caleb's lips curved into a rare smile. "You've got steady hands. That's a good thing." Noah blushed and turned away quickly, but Laura noticed the pride blooming across his face. The cabin looked different now, a home transformed. Where dust and decay had once ruled, there were now rows of beds, shelves of winter clothing, neatly stacked canned food, soft light from lanterns, and a thick rug covering the cold floor. This wasn't merely a house anymore. It was a refuge, a shelter, a promise. And the idea had come from Noah. Just days earlier, as they discussed what to do with the cabin now that the investigation had ended, Noah had tugged her sleeve gently and whispered, maybe this house could help people like us." Laura had felt something shift inside her, like a door swinging open. She had taken his idea to Rebecca Lindholm, who immediately supported it. Edgar arranged county volunteers. Anna helped coordinate transportation. And Caleb, quiet steady, Caleb offered his hands and his time without ever being asked. Today was the grand opening. The cabin would become a winter safe house for homeless families passing through, or for anyone in the county needing warmth during the brutal Minnesota months. Laura turned toward the old oak table in the corner where a small leather-bound journal rested beneath the glow of the lamp. The final journal of Margaret Hale. She approached it slowly, almost reverently. Her fingers traced the cracked spine. The last entry waited like a whisper from the past. She opened it. "If anyone finds this place, let it be for something better than silence. Let what we buried become the seed for something kinder. The world doesn't change from one truth alone. It changes when that truth is used to shelter someone else." Laura shut her eyes. Margaret's handwriting, slanted deliberate, felt like a hand placed gently on her shoulder. She whispered, "We're trying, Margaret. We're really trying." Caleb approached his boots softly, creaking on the wood. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Laura nodded. "Just thinking about her, about what she wanted." Caleb glanced at the journal. She'd be proud. This place was stuck between being forgotten and being mourned. "You gave it a new life." Laura's voice trembled slightly. "We all did." He didn't argue. Instead, he moved closer to stoke the fire, the flames glowing anew, casting warm light across his rugged silhouette. Snow began falling again outside, gentle and quiet. Laura returned to the children. Grace wrapped her arms around her waist, her small voice warm. "Mommy, are people coming tonight?" "Yes," Laura said softly. 3 families. They'll have beds, warm food, safety." Grace beamed, her eyes sparkling. "Like we have now." Laura knelt and kissed her forehead. "Exactly like we have now." As evening approached, lanterns flickered to life across the cabin. The wind softened outside, humming against the walls. Laura gathered her children on the couch near the fire. She wrapped her arms around all 3, drawing them close as light danced across their peaceful faces. For the first winter in her life, she wasn't afraid. She felt rooted. She felt sheltered. She felt deserving. And as she leaned back into the worn cushions, listening to the crackling fire and the gentle breathing of her children, she understood the truth Margaret had left behind. Winter would always come. But warmth, true warmth, could be built, could be shared, could be chosen. Laura looked at the journal one last time. The words glowed faintly in the firelight, a message stitched across decades. "Bring something better." She whispered, "We will." Snow fell beyond the window, soft and unhurried. But inside the cabin glowed like a lantern in the heart of Minnesota's winter, an answer to the cold, a defiance of silence, a beginning. In the quiet glow of that little cabin in the Minnesota woods, one truth rose brighter than any fire they lit. Miracles do not always arrive with thunder or angels or flashes of gold. Sometimes they come softly, in a forgotten journal, in a stranger's courage, in the fragile hope of a child. And sometimes they come in the form of a door opening when every other one has been shut. Perhaps that is how God works most often, through ordinary hands, ordinary days, ordinary people who simply refuse to give up. Through a tired mother who chooses kindness over fear. Through a community that learns to lift one another. Through families who find warmth again after years of cold. And maybe, just maybe, He placed Margaret's truth in Laura's path not as a burden but as a blessing, waiting to bloom, a reminder that no winter lasts forever, and no heart is too broken for God to mend. As you finish this story, may you be reminded that miracles are still real, still near, still waiting in the corners of everyday life. And may God bless you, your home, your family, your journey with warmth, protection, and the quiet bravery to open the next door He sets before you. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, resilience, and the miracles that still walk among us. May the Lord watch over you and all those you love.